Church, today we continue our journey through daring women who carried the rescue forward. Last week we stood beside Deborah under the palm tree of justice and watched her dare to lead when no one else would. Deborah stepped up when others stepped back. She trusted God when others trembled. She led with courage and she followed with faith. And we learned something important, didn't we? That the rescue plan of God, the grand sweeping story of redemption that started in the garden and found its climax at the empty tomb, did not end there. The resurrection of Jesus was not the conclusion. It was the catalyst. It launched a movement, a mission, a rescue that continues even now through people like you and me. This series is about the women who helped carry that rescue forward, women who did not sit back and wait, women who didn't stay silent when they could have, women who didn't shy away from the call of God on their lives, women who stood in the gap, who stepped into the story, who became vessels for God's mighty hand. And today we leave the battlefield where Deborah stood, and we enter the royal courts of Persia. We leave behind swords and chariots, and we step into silk and gold, banquets and intrigue. But the stakes, they are just as high this morning. Because today we meet a woman who didn't carry a sword, but carried a burden. A woman who didn't fight with weapons, but fought with wisdom. A woman who didn't lead an army, but led a nation to salvation. Her name, Esther. And she dared to speak up. Let me give you some background. The book of Esther is unique in the entire Bible. It's only one of two books named after a woman, the other being Ruth. But what truly sets Esther apart is something that has puzzled and fascinated scholars for centuries. God's name is never mentioned. There's no explicit prayers recorded. There are no miracles. There are no angelic visitations. It's almost as if on the surface, God is silent throughout Esther. But listen, that silence, it's not absence. Because what we see in Esther is not the dramatic, but the deliberate, not the overt, but the providential. God may not be named, but his fingerprints are everywhere. The story takes place during the Jewish exile, long after the glory days of David and Solomon. The Jews are scattered, living under Persian rule. Many have begun to assimilate into Persian culture. Their identity is fading. And right in the middle of this foreign land, we find Esther. She is a young Jewish woman living far from the promised land, with no power, no influence, and absolutely no control over her circumstances. She is taken, not by choice, into a royal beauty contest. She becomes queen. But she keeps her identity secret. She hides who she really is. And yet, though Esther is hidden, God is not idle. While his name is not spoken, his providence is unfolding. One commentator says, the hand of God is invisible, but invincible as well. Church, sometimes God works through burning bushes. But sometimes he works through whispered moments and quiet nudges. Through circumstances we don't understand, doors we didn't open, and positions we didn't seek. Esther did not seek the throne, but God placed her there. She didn't know her purpose. but God was guiding it. Even in silence, God is sovereign. Even in exile, God is present. And even in hiding, his plan is moving forward. God doesn't need to shout to be at work. He doesn't need to make a scene to make a difference. And maybe today you're in a season where God feels silent in your life. But friend, let Esther remind you, he is near. Then in the narrative of Esther, of course, we're going to have crisis. Everything seems fine on the surface. Esther is queen. Mordecai, her cousin, is keeping an eye on things from outside the palace gates. Life seemingly goes on, but beneath that surface, a storm is brewing. A man named Haman, a high official, second in command only to King Xerxes, becomes enraged. And why? Because Mordecai, a faithful Jew, refuses to bow down to him. Mordecai would not honor a man the way he honors God. And Haman does not just take offense, he takes action. This isn't just personal for Haman, this becomes genocidal. Haman plots to destroy not just Mordecai, but all the Jews in the Persian Empire, every man, woman, and child wiped out in a single day. He manipulates King Xerxes into issuing a decree sealed with the king's signet ring that on the 13th day of the 12th month, every Jew in the province of the empire will be killed and their property plundered. Church, this is no small thing. This is a death sentence for God's people. And we need to see the weight of this moment. This isn't just about the Jews of Persia. This is about the entire covenant of God. If Haman's plot succeeds, if the Jewish people are annihilated, the rescue plan of God is threatened. The promise to Abraham that through his descendants all nations will be blessed, Genesis 12:3, that promise hangs in the balance. The line that would one day bring Jesus into the world, that faces extinction. This is no ordinary crisis. This is an attack on the very heart of redemption. When Mordecai learns of this decree, he is devastated. He tears his clothes. He puts on sackcloth and ashes. He mourns loudly. He fasts. And he sends word to Esther, calling on her to act. Now Esther's safe over here in the palace. She's safe for now. But Mordecai's message is clear. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. Esther cannot remain silent. And then Mordecai delivers the words that have echoed down through the generations. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? This is her moment, but it is God's plan. And even when evil seems to win, God's purpose will not fail. Now, church, let's lean in a bit closer. Let's not rush past this. Let's sit in the tension of this moment. Esther, a young woman, an orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai, is now queen of the Persian Empire. But, this is a big but, she is not secure. Her crown does not guarantee her safety. Her position doesn't protect her from the danger that she faces now. Because the law of Persia is firm, unyielding. No one, absolutely no one, can approach King Xerxes without being summoned by him. Not even the queen. The penalty is death. Unless, of course, the king extended his golden scepter, then your life would be spared. Now Esther had not been summoned by the king in 30 days. That silence, it was deadly. She didn't know where she stood. She didn't know if the king still favored her. She didn't know if she would live or die. And yet Mordecai's challenge still echoed in her heart. Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Church, this was her moment, but it was also her risk. And what does she say? What is her response? I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Let's not rush past that. If I perish, I perish. This wasn't resignation. This wasn't defeat. This was faith. Faith that stood on the edge of the unknown. Faith that faced down death and still moved forward. Faith that didn't wait for certainty, but trusted in God's sovereignty. And yet Esther didn't act alone. She didn't rely on her own strength. She didn't just rush into the throne room unprepared. No, what did she do first? She called for a fast. Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me, she told Mordecai. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast with you. Now, church, we've got to unpack that. Fasting in Jewish tradition was never just about going without food or drink. It was about humbling oneself before God. It was an act of dependence, a physical expression of a spiritual hunger. It was the way the people of God sought his presence, his guidance, his deliverance. And though the text of Esther never mentions prayer directly, don't miss this. They fasted because they knew they needed God. They recognized his presence even in the silence. They providence even without his name on their lips. In that silence, they sought him. 3 days and 3 nights of fasting. No food, no water, no distractions. Just focus. Focus on the one who has always been faithful. Focus on the God who led them through the Red Sea. He who had sustained them in the wilderness, who had made a covenant with their fathers. Church, how often do we rush into decisions, into risks, into actions without seeking God first? How often do we neglect the power of fasting and prayer in our lives? Jesus himself, when speaking to his disciples about faith and spiritual battles, said in Matthew 17:21, "This kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting." Fasting is not about manipulating God. It's about aligning ourselves with God. It's about clearing away the noise, the clutter, the distractions, and tuning our hearts to his will. And let me say this. When you are facing moments of risk, when God is calling you to speak, to stand, to act, fasting is a powerful way to prepare your heart. Fasting humbles us. Fasting sharpens us. Fasting centers us. Esther knew that she couldn't do this alone, and neither can we. Before we step into the battles God has called us to, before we speak truth in difficult places, before we take risks for the kingdom, we must seek him through prayer, through fasting, through surrender. Esther's courage did not come from her position, it came from her preparation. She sought God first. And because of that, she could say boldly, faithfully, if I perish, I perish. Because when you are anchored in God's presence, fear loses its power. Now here's where the story turns, and God's silent sovereignty takes central stage. Esther, after 3 days of fasting, after preparing her heart, after seeking strength from the God who seems absent but is always near, she rises. She dresses in her royal robes. She walks down the halls of the palace, every step a prayer, every breath a risk, and she stands at the inner court facing the throne. Will the king look up? Will he extend mercy? And then he sees her. And he extends the golden scepter. She lives. But Esther doesn't rush in. She doesn't immediately shout out the danger. No, she is patient. She is wise. She knows that timing is everything. She invites the king and Haman to a banquet. One banquet turns into a second banquet. You see, Esther is not just bold. She is led, guided by something greater than her understanding. And at that second banquet, with the king's heart open, Esther finally speaks. King, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. She reveals the plot. She reveals her identity. She reveals the risk. She's not just a queen. She's a Jew. One of the people Haman has marked for death. And Xerxes, he is furious. He rises in a rage and leaves the room. And Haman, Haman, he knows his end is near. He throws himself at Esther, begging for his life. But just as the king returns, he finds Haman falling onto the couch where Esther is reclining, and the king says this, will he even assault the queen while she is in my house? And that's it. The verdict is sealed. One of the servants speaks up, and he says this, Haman has set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall in his courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai. Xerxes responds, then impale Haman on it. And the very instrument of death built to destroy a faithful man becomes the instrument of justice for a wicked one. Now, some might call that coincidence, but it is not. We know better. That is providence. This is the unseen hand of God, moving pieces on the board, turning hearts, aligning events, not with thunder or lightning, but with quiet authority. The Jews, they are saved. Not because Esther was lucky, not because Mordecai was clever, but because God was faithful even in silence. Because the God who seems quiet is always in control, always writing rescue, always keeping his promise. Church, as we bring this closer to home, Esther's story isn't just history. It's a call to action for us today. Her courage, her faith, her willingness to speak up in a moment of crisis, they challenge us this morning. Let me share 3 lessons with you that we can take from Esther's daring stand. Number 1, God places you where you are for a purpose. You are not where you are by accident. whether in your workplace, your school, your family, your community, God has positioned you to act. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Esther's story reminds us that God orchestrates our lives with purpose. You may not see it yet. It may feel ordinary. But God uses the ordinary to accomplish the extraordinary. Number 2, silence is easy, but speaking up may save lives. Esther could have remained silent. She could have protected herself, but silence when truth is needed can be deadly. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Proverbs 31:8. There are people who need your voice. People who need your courage. Maybe it's to stand up for someone who's hurting. Maybe it's to share the gospel with someone who is searching. Maybe it's to confront injustice or to offer grace. Speak up. Number 3, prepare spiritually before acting boldly. Esther didn't run into the throne room unprepared. She fasted, she sought God, and she invited others to do the same. Jesus himself fasted at the beginning of his ministry, his public ministry. Fasting and prayer align our hearts with God's will, sharpen our focus, and give us strength for the battle ahead. Before we take bold steps, we must kneel and surrender. Seek God's guidance, rest in his strength. Church, Esther's courage just wasn't for her time. It was a model for ours. God is still looking for those who will dare to speak up. Will you be one of them? Will you trust his purpose? Will you raise your voice for his truth? Will you prepare your heart and follow his call? Because the world still needs Esther's, and God is still writing his rescue through us. Church, let me ask you plainly, what about you? What will you do when your moment comes? Will you even recognize it? Because hear me, it will come. Maybe not in a palace, maybe not before a king, but it will come. There will be a time, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, when you will be faced with a choice to stay silent, to blend in, to protect yourself, or to speak up, to step out, to stand firm for what is right, for what is true, for what is God's. Esther didn't know how her story would end, but she knew who held her future. She knew that silence was no longer an option, and neither is it for us. Church, we are living in a world that needs voices of truth, of grace, of boldness. We are surrounded by people who are lost, people who are hurting, people who are bound by fear, by lies, by darkness, and God has placed you right where you are for such a time as this. Will you speak? Will you risk? Will you trust? Because here's the truth. The rescue continues. The mission hasn't ended. The call is still ringing. And God is looking for Esther's today. For those who will say, like the prophet Isaiah, "Here I am, send me." As one scholar said, courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of faith. It's time to act. It's time to believe. It's time to speak. Your voice matters. Your moment is now. Will you dare to step into the story? Will you dare to carry the rescue forward? Will you dare to speak up? Here are your 3 questions this week. Look around yourself this week and ask this question as well. For what or for whom have I been placed where I am for such a time as this? Then do not back down. Do not chicken out. Be a part of God's rescue. Be blessed and be a blessing to others.